Hi. All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm not sure if I can hear you guys. Welcome, everybody, to the Virtuous Con Juneteenth panel on Black women in publishing. I'm really glad you guys are here. I am Leslie Penelope. I will be participating and moderating, and I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. So let's start with Justina.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, it's echoey. Is it echoey on your end?
A little echoey, not terrible.
All right. I always have headphones in case, because at this point we're all Zoom experts, right? Like our entire year online. Hi, my name is Justina Ireland. I'm the author of the New York Times bestselling book Dreadlock Nation and its sequel Deathless Divide. I'm also the author of numerous Star Wars books, most recently Star Wars: A Test of Courage, which is a middle grade book that came out in January and also hit the New York Times bestseller list. And it's part of the High Republic Publishing Initiative, which is an all new era of Star Wars storytelling that Lucasfilm and Disney are undertaking. In addition, I also just had a middle grade book come out in May called Ophi's Ghost, and it's about a little girl named Ophi who realizes she can see ghosts after her father is lynched for voting, and her mother moved to Pittsburgh as part of the Great Migration to flee Jim Crow. So I'm busy and tired, and I'm so great to be here. So glad to be here.
Thanks. Elle, let's go next.
Hi, I'm LL McKinney. Most folks just call me L. You can pick either one. I really don't have a preference. Pronouns are she, her. I am the author of the Nightmareverse series, which starts with A Blade So Black, A Dream So Dark, both which are both out now, and the upcoming A Crown So Curse. I am also the author on the team for Nubia REALONE through DC, a graphic novel, and on a few comic projects for DC, including the Wonder Woman Future State project, and most recently, the Power Rangers Unlimited. I had to think about it for a second, where we find out about Astronema from season 6, Power Ranger in Space, her background. And I'm really grateful to be back at Virtuous Con. I love it here.
Thanks. And Jen.
Hey everybody, pronouns she, her. I'm Jennifer Baker, how many syllables you want to say today. I'm a senior editor at Amistad, one of the longest legacy Black presses at a major imprint. I am also the author of the upcoming YA novel, Forgive Me Not, coming out with Putnam Books for Young Readers, which is part of Penguin Random House. I edited the anthology Everyday People, The Color of Life, which came out a couple years ago at this point. I'm also the creator and host of the Minorities in Publishing podcast, which is 7 years running.
Thanks. And I'm Leslie. I write as Penelope. I write epic fantasy and paranormal romance. My series Earthsinger Chronicles is with St. Martin's Press, and the first book is Song of Blood and Stone. The fourth and final book comes out in August, Requiem of Silence. And I have a new book coming out next year that will be announced soon, but they said I could talk about it with Orbit. And it's going to be a 1920s era fantasy heist set in Washington, D.C. So I'm super excited about that. So everybody, can you guys share what it was like to get your first story published by a major publisher? And was there any pushback from your agent or publisher, or were they excited to see your work? You want to start?
Who talks first? You talk first. I talk first. I always do that. I guess I'll go first since I technically did talk first. I started out actually with other books before A Blade So Black. It's the first one that was acquired and published. It's not the first one that I was agented with, so it's kind of twofold, my story. And I talk about that because the first 3 books that I wrote were about white boys. Because as a kid in a house that didn't really read science fiction and fantasy, we had Toni Morrison and we had, James Baldwin, and we had contemporary and nonfiction, but we didn't have science fiction and fantasy. My parents weren't huge into that. They are now. And so I didn't know about Octavia Butler and such until college, because teachers and librarians, that's where most of my pushback came from. So that was the first time I gave myself permission to be the hero of my own story. And my agent was, at the time, I'm on agent number 3, was she didn't push back against it, but there were times where the focus was, let's shift more towards trying to make this a romance, or let's shift more towards, moving away from like the story of that's going on in the background of a Black girl being killed by police and things like that. So there wasn't really pushback, but I did end up watering down the story a little bit because I was getting that we love the story but not connected to the character answer that you hear from editors. And then it was a woman of color who was the one who acquired it. And on the phone, she said that I can tell that you kind of want to go there with some of these things that you're trying to put in the story, and I want to support you in that. So everything that you took out, put back in, please. So I didn't get pushback on the story in as such from those two. Um, but I did hear, it's from other editors when we were on submission, because we were on submission for 2 years. Um, can you talk more about this? Can the story be more about that when it comes to like the racism that's in the background, but the character herself doesn't really deal with because she's with family and friends, you know? Um, and it was like, well, no, because it's real, but it's not, our lives don't revolve around it. Can we please just go on this portal adventure? So that's kind of how it was for me in a somewhat short, long explanation. Someone else could talk now.
Justina, you want to go?
Sure. So my first book came out in 2013, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't explain that like the publishing landscape, especially in young adult publishing, was so very different then than it is now. Not that everything is fixed, but it's just we've progressed so much further that my first book that I actually went out to get an agent with was a book called Between Hell and Ohio, and this was the end of the kind of the paranormal phase in YA, and we were transitioning into the more dystopian phase. But I had written a paranormal because that's what I've always loved. I've always loved, contemporary fantasy and those sorts of things. And the first response back I got from an agent I queried was, I love this book, but I think it's a little bit racist. And because I was talking about like what it was like for this biracial girl to be biracial. And I was like talking about, what it's like when your white friends all of a sudden like say something racist to you, and how do you react and those sorts of things. And so like, the paranormal aspect was a small part of it. And basically, the feedback I got was nearly like, hey, why don't you make this character white? I did not, of course, because I was like, that's not what I wanted to do. And then I got my first agent. And the book went on submission. It got to acquisitions a lot, like probably 3 or 4 times. And every single time I had the same kind of instance that Elle was talking about with, we just can't connect to this main character. This main character she's so aggressive, or, these like kind of like these code words that we know and we hear. To the point where my agent is like, look, this is a great book and I don't know why people aren't picking it up, but what are you working on now? And for me, my agent didn't say anything because my agent at the time would never have said anything. But that previous agent's voice was always in the back of my mind, like, you're a good writer, but you can't get published because your characters aren't white. So I wrote a white girl, and then my book went to auction. And it was literally within a span of months that this happened. Like I was on submission when I wrote this other book. I went back through and I was like, you know what? I'll just make her your basic, like she's blonde, she likes running, like she's got like no personality. And that was my first book, Vengeance Bound, because like sometimes you do what you got to do to get in the door. And then as soon as I had that 2-book contract, bam, I went right back and Promise of Shadows had a Black main character. Now that was my first book contract. By the time I sold my next book contract, which was for Dread Nation, the feedback, the response, everything had changed because we had gone through the We Need Diverse Books movement. So, we've had a lot of movements in publishing to increase, representation, especially Black representation, especially quality Black representation written by Black authors. But, that 2014, 2015 timeframe really pushed a lot of conversations forward, at least in kidlit. I know on the adult side, we had Race Fail in like back in 2009, and we're still kind of we still didn't make our way forward on the adult side, but they'll figure it out and they'll catch up. And so like when Dread Nation came out, it was a completely different conversation. When Promise of Shadows came out, they were like, what kind of cover do you want? How about a font-based cover, right? Because, and if you see the cover Promise of Shadows, it's basically like, it's a very beautiful cover. There's no people on that cover. By the time Dread Nation came out, they're like, my editor at the time now, of course, is a completely different editor, completely different publishing house. So that also is part of the difference. But he was like, we are going to put a Black girl on the cover. She's going to look awesome. She's going to look amazing. And the Dread Nation Deathless Divide covers are the best covers I've ever had. Just because it was like, we're not going to try to like worry about who's going to read this book. We're just going to put out a really great book. So yeah, so like that's really kind of like, you know, my journey. But I think, you know, now if you're an aspiring author now, I think you're coming into a much better publishing landscape, because I do think even if people aren't always doing it the right way, there's a lot more concern in certain places. In certain places, it's still a shit show. But in a lot of places, people are trying to like make things better and trying to, you know, have that conversation.
Yeah, for me, I first published in 2015, and I started out self-published because I went to VONA, which is a workshop for for writers of color. I'd also gone to Hurston Wright, which is a writers' workshop for Black writers, and I kept hearing the same things from just about the horrors of the publishing industry and all of the struggles. People were they'd gone through a lot, the people who had published, and it showed. And so I was just like, well, I do a lot of DIY stuff. I was a filmmaker. I started a literary magazine. So I knew I had the skills that I felt like I could self-publish well. And I just didn't want to deal with anybody trying to change my story. And I didn't feel at that point, you know, writing the book in 2013, 2014, that I could publish it the way I wanted to. So I self-published the first 2 books in the series, Earthsinger Chronicles, which is like for adult fantasy. And I was working on the 3rd one when I got an email just from my website email form from an editor at St. Martin's Press, who was a Black woman, Monique Patterson. And she had seen the books that I had self-published. And initially she asked me to pitch something new. And then it came around to she wanted to republish them. So, you know, it's not that usual at that point. I see more and more people who are self-published and then publishers come and want to republish those books, but it's still not the norm, definitely, for any aspiring authors. But that's what happened to me. And so I agreed to take the books off the market and have them go through a major publisher. I didn't have an agent at that time. I did the deal with a literary attorney. And then eventually, once the first book came out, I did go and I found an agent who was willing to work with me because I had a 4-book deal that I already signed. So it was like, at some point in the future, she would make some money off me, I hope. So yeah, my path has been different. But I think because it was a Black woman editor at the house and she had a lot of power in her position, she was able to sort of just publish whatever she wanted to. That made a big difference. I know, Elle, you said that you had worked with a woman of color who was an editor. Justina, have you had editors who were women or people of color? You haven't?
My editor, but I'm at BalzerBeret, which is like a boutique publisher within HarperCollins. They publish people like Angie Thomas. So like they have a very different focus than a lot of publishers. So like if you're like, you know, somewhere like Harper Teen, which is a much bigger umbrella, you know, you're not necessarily getting like I think BalzerBeret only publishes like maybe 10 books a year, 10 YA books, which is a very small list compared to like the rest. So yeah, I've had a really good experience there, but of course I know that my experience is not the experience that everybody has. My first experience wasn't great, like you know, but so like I have had bad experiences. That was at Simon & Schuster. Sorry, Simon & Schuster.
So yeah, just a variety of experiences, but having more people of color as the gatekeepers, I think is one of the things that has been changing slowly over time through this kind of movement that we've been having. So obviously I want to bring in Jenn, who is an editor. And Jenn, can you talk about Amistad and about what you do there, especially for the aspiring writers in the audience?
Sure. And I think it's funny because I've worked in publishing, it'll be 20 years next year, right? And so it's interesting to hear that something's better than otherwise because it's always external, right? When you work in the industry and you see the people every day, it's changed and it's not changed. What's changed is the mechanicians, right? What's changed is we got sensitivity readers now. What's changed is we have Twitter now, so we're more alert when other people get called out. What's changed is like reactionary things and then money that's put behind it, right? So while I do agree that Kidlit has actually helped propel a conversation that's been ever present for eons in the industry, that having worked in Kidlit and knowing so many professionals who work in Kidlit, that we are dealing with the same crap. Most of the time, like when I go into work every day, the executive editors of color are dealing with the same crap I'm dealing with in the adult. You know what I mean? So it looks, it's always interesting when you have the optics of it, right? And that's how publishing and any industry works, is like we work on optics. We want you to think everything is great, but it's not great. But the work is happening, and it's happening incredibly slowly, and we see these ebbs and flows, right? So the mass, it's like we're seeing what happened, in the 90s, when a lot of, like you were saying, Leslie, DIY people and people, like urban fiction was a big thing. And then they're like, we can profit off of that. And then we don't know how to sell it. So why aren't we making the money that the individuals were making when they were doing it? And that's what we're kind of seeing recirculate again. So hiring a lot of people of color, hoping that they'll do that work, hoping that that money will be made. It might be for some people, it might not be for the others. And then potentially seeing a big cut, potentially. And we're going to see a recession. That's just like, we're going to see one after like everything that's happened with COVID. And so that's also in our minds from a business perspective. And so that doesn't really affect the writer in terms of like, you shouldn't be writing, you should absolutely write the stories you want to write. But I also think like in terms of like the capitalistic nature of everything that we're dealing with, even as artists, sadly, is one in which, we just need to pay attention to how things have gone to learn from what it will be. And so as a senior editor at Amistad, I acquire books. I mean, that's the most simplistic way to say what my job is. What's great about it is I only deal with BIPOC. So I don't have to look at any submissions by white people. I mean, it could be about Black people. I've gotten those, which it shouldn't be surprising, but I get it. Writing about Black people. But I could just say that doesn't fit our mission and that doesn't fit our landscape. And you can do whatever you want to do, but I don't have to spend money on it. And so that's always been our focus. Like Amistad has had Pulitzer Prize winners and National Book Award finalists and many bestsellers. We were one of the first places where Attica Locke published her stuff. Cicely Tyson was our biggest title this past year. God rest her soul. So I'm coming into Amistad, bringing in kind of like trying us to go back to our commercial space. So I just acquired a Gothic horror novel from a debut author, Danye Coles, who I'm very, very, very excited about. She's a wonderful, wonderful writer doing wonderful, wonderful things.
I saw that announcement, Jen, and I'm also very excited about that because I was like, that's everything I want to read in one announcement.
It's really, really good. She's amazing. And, I'm hoping to acquire a thriller. And these are kind of racially focused stories. I think everyone's comparing everything to Get Out, which, that's the jargon we use in house, right? It's like, what does everyone know? Get Out. It's like, it's hitting the paranoia of Get Out, but it's not Get Out. So it's like tackling, that's how I talk about books. It's like most common denominator, because certain times you'll hear white people say, I don't know that person. And it's like, how do you not know that person? Oh, right. You don't watch BET. So of course you don't know that person. So what am I finding as an editor to sell this to like a white dominant space? Because even though it's a Black press, and all these BIPOC spaces that we see being created, or the individuals that work in them, we do have to talk to a white majority space and get them to understand why we love the book and get them to see the vision that we see. And it helps when the author is just a really strong author and has a very strong point of view, because you make my job easier. But then my job becomes, I have to let people understand, there's a market for this. We can do this. We can help build this author. This author is going to be great. We love them. This is the subject matter. But we're taking pieces of all these things that are kind of mainstream to help our sales team, our publisher, whomever, understand the book. And we do that constantly. So I do it in order to buy the book. I do it again if I successfully buy the book, when we're marketing the book, when we're talking about the cover, and when I'm presenting it to sales, because we do that. A year before a book comes out, editorial says, this is what the book is about. I really want you to be excited about it. And this is what, and we're kind of, again, using those markers to talk to people. So I think authors might not understand that, when you go to certain places, I'm not the end all be all. And Justina kind of touched on that as well. It's like, I'm not the end all be all. but I need to understand your vision and the way that you see it, and then be able to talk effectively about it in-house.
Yeah, that lines up with something that came in from the chat. Someone says that it feels like the environment is less nurturing and more defensive. And asks, do we need more BIPOC as agents, acquisitions editors, and publishers? So what do you guys think about that? We need more people of color?
I mean, yes, always. But I think we also, what Jen touched on, is we need to retain more people of color. I mean, you can look at the level of, junior editors, younger editors, and then like where they wash out. You can see a pattern. Like it's not, you don't, I mean, I'm not like Jen, I don't work in a publishing house, right? Like I just work in publishing as an author and keep track of my money, so to speak. So like and as an author, I really do think you need to know like all the stuff Jen's talking about to keep track of your money. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a bad contract, not understand why you're not making money, and lots of bad things will happen. But I do think one of the things we need to, one of the reasons the environment is less nurturing right now is because it's really competitive. I think publishing is always competitive, and I think people don't realize that even though people are friends, there's still a layer of competition there. Like I cheer on my friends, I'm happy when they get things, but at the same time, it's like, okay, now I know where I need to be next. What's that next level look like for me? Like I see what they're getting, I need to get that too to be successful. So that's part of the reason. The other thing is I think, we can't expect Black people to fix racism because we're not the ones creating the problem. So like when you bring in more BIPOC, editors and agents and all that stuff, if they're still running up against the same problems at the sales team meeting or at acquisitions, it doesn't fix anything. Now you've just introduced BIPOC people into a terrible situation and expect them to stick with it. And so that's always been my perspective. It's like, yes, and right? Like, yes, it'd be great to have more agents of color, but we also need to have them empowered to actually sell books. Because if you're an agent and you don't sell books, you're not going to eat. And why would you stick? Why would you stick around?
And I think it helps on another level because, like, my first editor, she was Filipina, and my second editor was a Black woman. So before the first book came out, that editor left for a better job, better opportunity somewhere else. Because even like authors want to be paid what we're worth, but people working on the books also do too. Like that's work that shouldn't be undervalued either. And then the Black woman who worked on A Dream So Dark ended up leaving as well after the. So I was on this track. I was like, okay, so the one person of color in the office is the one who works on my book, but then bounces afterwards because they're not getting the resources they want to use to be able to do what they want to do. And it was frustrating as an author to ask for things and to see my editor ask for things and to be ignored, because they also get ignored. And but it also, I think it's less nurturing on another aspect is when I had um the Black woman as my editor, there were things I didn't have to deal with that I would have with a white editor. Like when the book comes back from copy edit and there's red lines everywhere because my characters don't use the King's English and the copy editor is trying to change things up or doesn't understand an aspect or is asking questions like, why would her head hurt? Because she just got braids. Can we just, things like that I don't have to explain. I can see in the notes, stat from my editor, and stat means leave it alone. Don't change it. And they're providing explanation like this is the voice of the character, leave it alone. This is the voice of the character, leave it alone. So I don't have to expend the energy doing that instead of working on the edits. And I have worked with white editors as well where I did have to do that. And so there's an added layer there that just makes it easier for me to do the work of writing as opposed to doing the work of explaining my culture for the millionth time to someone who ought to know better 3 books in. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's also another aspect of it that a lot of people don't think about actively, but just having someone there so that that's one less thing that you have to deal with that takes your time and energy, because it does. Like at the end of copy edits, I'm like, I just take it away. I'm done with it. Please, I don't. Fine. Go ahead and put the ing back on there. I don't care. So you just get tired of fighting, even little things.
Yeah, and to both their points, because I agree with pretty much everything they, like Justina and Elle have said. It's funny because my first experience editing Everyday People, I worked with a Black editor, and that was not a good experience for me. And now I have a Black woman editor for my author book that's coming out next year, and that's been a great experience for me. And so I get kind of, like when we do these kind of like, just get more people of color in there, and then it's like, it's just like, we got to think more deeply, friends, about what that means, because they'll do it. The industry will do it and not be vetting people. And it's not to say we all need to come in with the same mindset and the same geographical input and the same, like, I'm not saying that. I do think that there are some people, again, as someone who's worked in the industry, like I've dealt with a lot of toxicity from certain white people in certain spaces. And I've dealt with that toxicity from other people of color, especially cis men. And as someone who's cis het and female, like that comes into play too, like gender bias and how men can still get elevated in a way that Black women will never get elevated in the same way, even when we're doing a good amount of work. And so I think it gets deeper than that, right? And so yes, and to Justina's point of like retention is important, and also thinking about all the departments. Sales is crucial, and people still really rarely talk about that.
Yeah, so like one of the things I do want to point out, like a well-placed person of color can be life-changing, kind of like what Elle said. Because for Dread Nation, when Dread Nation was acquired, it was not acquired as like a big book. There was no splashy marketing tied to it, but it found a champion on the publicity team who was a Black woman who was like, this book is great. Not only that, it came out like 2 months after Black Panther, right? The movie. So like once the movie came out and did so well, she had a lot of leverage to go back to her, the money people and say, hey, can I get more marketing for this book? Because look at all these other things that are doing well. So I do think like, Jen makes an excellent point, because I do, like a well-placed, supportive person of color can like help you reap rewards. That made my career. I will not lie. The book could have been great and still nobody would have read it, right? That's not how books become successful. They become successful because somebody in the house who's in a good position loves them and can get them in front of the right people. So that's the only reason that book did so well. So I do think that's an important thing to say. Yes, but also there's all these other mitigating factors, because I think one of the things is like we're like so like attuned to social media and trying to fix things in like 240 characters or whatever, that we don't realize it's not that easy to fix things, right? Things take a lot. And I just want to, like, there's a comment in the chat about I figured the worst thing about trying to get published traditionally was selling my story to someone else to control. That's not how traditional publishing works if you're not working on IP. I just want to because I think maybe there's some that your perspective could get edited out. No, when you're selling a book to a regular publisher, that's all your product. But if you screwed it up, you screwed it up. That's all you. But if you're working on like something like Star Wars or Marvel or DC, they do have the final control because they own those characters. So I just wanted to clear that out, because I don't want us to give the perspective that like our bad experiences with editors somehow led to us like losing our vision. If we lost our vision, it was because we just lost the will to keep fighting, I think is more accurate.
And sometimes,
I'm sorry, Leslie, but also I think we need to talk about how much power authors do have, because I feel like in these conversations, especially the comment you just read, Justina, like every time I talk to authors, it's like they just do whatever. They just say whatever. And I'm just like, did you pick, like I did a talk last week and raised money for charity. And I told people, are you talking to your agent about who you're submitting your book to? And I see all these people say, oh, well, all these white people didn't like my book. And I said, okay, well, how many people of like POC editors did you submit to? Oh. And I'm like, I see, now that's your responsibility. And maybe you just didn't know. Maybe you just didn't know that you had the power to actually look it up. But the resources aren't always free, but the resources are there. This is the millennia of Google. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I understand not being able to afford resources. They do exist. So from just people, like, especially if you're like working with certain people, like I hear from a lot of white agents acquiring, books by BIPOC authors. And so I'm prioritizing BIPOC authors, but I'm also working with their agent. And I don't know the integrity of that agent. I'm basing it on what I'm receiving, right? And so if I'm on the list, I'm hoping the author wanted me to read your book, not just this. She's Black. You're Black. She's Black. That should work out. I follow her on Twitter. She seems funny. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that. You should know that I'm because by the time if I like it and we're gonna talk and have a meeting and I'm gonna get a sense of your work and you're doing the same for me, like it's a mutual vetting situation. I don't want to sit here be all like, so what do you know about my imprint? I don't know anything. I don't know. But a lot of times I've talked to many like best-selling authors too, that they're just like, oh, well, we didn't go, or we only went to the one big person who gets all the Black books. And so they're so overwhelmed, they can't even get to it from an inbox perspective. And so all these other editors of color, I mean, now they're more and we're being a bit more visible or something, but I don't know that we're all on the lists, you know? You need to control that too. Authors have responsibility. This is your work. And to Justina and Elle's point, I can't make you do things. If you really don't want to do it, then don't do it. But also, we're having a conversation, and if what I say doesn't jive with you, then we shouldn't work together. Period. End of story. But again, I understand finances come into play. I understand, like Justina said, you get too tired. You're like, I can't fight this anymore. You know, it's been 9 months. I need to get the book out. I want to get, you know, I love this story. Let's just do it again. And you pick your battles, right? From the jump, though, you do have these power to say, I don't want to work with you. But, you know, I understand the feeling of you want to get your book published. But I'm talking to so many people who feel like this is the only way. This one person who wants it is the one person who wants it. But I'm not always feeling that that's the person who gets it. And I worry about that a lot, especially in this rash purchasing, because I'm competing with a lot more white people. My boss is competing with a lot more white people now because the mandate has been set. Diversify your list. And for those imprints like Amistad, that's always been what they've done. You know how many auctions we're in that my boss was not in years ago? And suddenly all these people like know who Gabrielle Union is, who didn't know who she was before. That's what we're dealing with in-house. And authors need to be picky too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was like, just like to build on what Jen says, that's one of my things I think is like the biggest myths about publishing is like, I have to get an agent. I have to win an agent. An agent works for you. And if it's not working for you, it's not working for you. Look, I have bought back 2 projects this year because I was working with editors or I was working on IP that I was like, this isn't going to work for me. And I'm in a position now where I can do that. Could I have done that with my first contract? No. And that sucked. I had to kind of just, you know, white knuckle it through. But there is nothing worse than a bad book, than publishing a bad book. And it took me a long way to find my way back after publishing a bad book or having a bad publishing experience. So definitely, like Jen's saying, you know, vet the people you're talking to. You know, get the subscription to Publishers Marketplace, which gives you all the deals and lets you know what editors are acquiring. And then go read those books when they come out and see if you like them. Because if you don't like an editor's list, you're not going to like working with them because you're not going to have the same vision. So that's, sorry, I know, Leslie, you were trying to talk, but I just really, I always, like, I hear, like Jen says, like, you go and you talk to aspiring writers and they're like, I got an agent. I'm like, who's your agent? They're like, yeah, but they don't return my emails and they don't like my work. And I'm like, why are you working with them? Like, agents, like, there's lots of agents out there. It costs them nothing to represent you, right? You are all potential. So find someone who enjoys what your potential is and wants to nurture that.
Yeah, a bad agent is worse than no agent at all. And, you know, there's so many different experiences with publishing and kind of just underscoring what they were saying. But the most important thing, and especially for Black creators and I guess all BIPOC creators, all marginalized creators, is taking control of your career and feeling empowered to take control, which a lot of times you don't. Like you find like, oh, this one agent, like they were saying, and it feels magical and you've been chosen, you've been plucked out of the slush. And it's like, I can't say anything to ruin that. But if you're going to have a bad experience, you're going to regret that later on. And that's just when I kind of came in, I was like, okay, I was doing fine self-publishing. I was happy to do it. I was coming into publishing thinking that, well, these people have decades of experience. They're professionals. They do this every day. They know what they're doing. And one of the most surprising things for me was, I mean, yes, they know what they're, but it's a job for them. They go to work, they clock in. Some people are better than others. They're human beings like anyone else. And some of them are better at their jobs and some of them aren't. And some of them care more than others. And, some don't. So if you feel some type of way about something, definitely speak up. There's this fear that I think a lot of writers have that if I say something, my contract will be canceled, or I'll have a bad working relationship. I'll be difficult. The same thing that I think especially Black women deal with in any kind of job situation. We don't want to be difficult. We don't want to be the angry Black woman. But I mean, your name is on that book, and that book is going to be on shelves for a really long time. So if something is happening that you don't like, that doesn't represent what you want for your work and for your career, then you're the only one who's going to speak up for yourself. Your agent may or may not. Like, your agent does work for you mostly, but they also have 50 other clients, and they have to maintain good relationships with the editors and publishers. So they're going to only go so far so as not to jeopardize their ability to sell other books. Like, I think that's one of the most important things that someone told me about agents. And so it's like, yeah, I love my agent. I have a great relationship with her, but I know that, she has to look out for her other 50 clients as well. So how far is she going to go? And that's have a community is the other thing that my advice for people. Jenn was talking about the information and Googling things. Talking to other people who've been through it is invaluable. Like, finding a community, whether it's online, whether it's, I joined RWA because I was writing romance, but if it's SIFWA, if there's more organizations for your genre or locally or whatever, you can find groups online. There's Slacks and Discord channels and things. But find people to talk to who've been where you want to go, and learn from them and ask them questions about the things that you don't know. Are there any other questions? There was a question I think that we kind of covered in the chat about acquiring editors. Is it a matter of the publisher an agent pitches the story to and the acquisitions editor it's pitched to? I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I think
what that question is.
Yeah, if you want to clarify, if we have time to go back to that. And then there was another question for a green novelist trying to finish their book, but it's a struggle. And even when done, I wouldn't know where to spread it. So I think send it is probably what they meant. Any advice for struggling writers trying to finish their first book?
Like, trying to get to the end, or what to do after you get to the, because those are two different things. Because a lot of people don't get to the end. So if you want advice for that, that's a different mindset than once you've gotten to the end, what do you do then? So trying to get to the end, what I would tell you, or what any author could tell you, is what has worked for them and for that book that they're talking about. Because what worked for one book for me won't work for the second book for me, because stuff changes, other stuff that you're working on has an impact on things. Deadlines make a big difference on when something does or doesn't get done, and so you're holding a lot of plates. So you're just trying to figure out, if you have to drop one, which one's the smallest one or the strongest one that won't make the biggest, problem. So as far as finishing it, my advice would be to give yourself grace for when you can't do something, and to hone in on when you can. It's that's about the best that I can give you, without knowing what it is that you do and trying to be, broad enough for everyone who's watching. As far as afterwards, however you do it, getting the book edited, whether it's through critique partners, other people who are at your level that you meet either online, or, well, we don't do in-person things anymore. So, but if you do an in-person thing, if you meet people there, that's a good way to do it. There are developmental editors out there who, you could pay somebody to look at the book before it goes to an editor. Some people do it. It works for them. Like Jen said, there are resources. Some of them aren't free. Some of them are. Critique partners are free. Developmental editor is not. But I would say that as long as you have getting to the end goal in mind, then you're well ahead of a lot of people who aren't. And as far as what to do next, that depends on what you want to do. Do you want to self-publish? Do you want to go traditional publishing? Figure out what you want for the book and for your career, and then look into that more specifically. Like, if you want an agent to do traditional, then look up agents, who they work with, their other clients. some authors are happy to talk about agents that they've been with. So you want to talk to authors who have left that agent, whether or not it was a good breakup, a bad breakup, because they're like, I'm on agent number 3. It happens. So I think that's the best answer I could give without specifics for that question.
Okay. Would you ever recommend to someone struggling to find representation to just take what you can get your foot in the door, and then look or hope for a better fit down the road? I see head shaking.
So if you're struggling for representation, I would take a step back and figure out why. Because if you have a good book, like if you have a well-written product, I mean, because let's be honest, right? A book becomes a product once you start trying to publish it. It's no longer, it's your art and your baby when you're writing it and you love it. But then when it gets on the shelves, it's a product. It's got to move units, or else, that's all anybody cares about. But if your agent thinks you wrote something that's sellable, other agents will as well. Like there is not like a lot of unique thought among agents. They're all looking at the market, looking at the holes in the market, and trying to figure out where they can put a book and where they can place it and where they can publish it well. So if you're struggling to get representation, like say you've gone on you've had a couple full requests and then you've come back with rejections, but then somebody wants to represent you, I would still, if you feel like that's not a good fit for you, I would still keep querying, because unless there's something fundamentally wrong with your book, like, maybe your third act falls apart, or like your character arcs aren't clean or something like that, then you're going to get a chance with somebody else. I just think we sell ourselves so short when we let ourselves just take whatever's available instead of like working hard, not even working hard, waiting and like being smart about the moves we make. Because I know a lot of people who I'm just going to take everything I can get. And then, they're 10 books deep. They're not making any more on their advances than they did for the first book, right? Their advances are steadily going down. And now they're in like what we call book debt, which is where you owe more books than you made money on, and you don't have time to write them. So yeah, so just make smart moves, like know what you want as an author, and wait for that thing to come around.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Oh,
you're
I'm sorry.
starting off at no, we
You
both
go first,
did
Al.
it.
No, you go first.
Well, you're starting off at 0 point when you're looking for representation. If you get, you just take what you can get and you just go along, which kind of ties into some stuff that we were talking about earlier, where you don't have, you have more power than you think, right? The editor who acquired A Blade So Black, I took that editor to my agent because she had come up in a group that I was in. They were like, hey, here's a new editor. It's a woman of color at this thing. She's looking for this. She does this. So I did my research and I was like, I like her. So I took that name to my agent and I was like, you submit to her. She wasn't on your list, but because again, the agent works for you. But if you find that you're just taking what you can get, what'll happen with that bad agent and that bad book is you dig yourself into a hole. And now to get back to starting just at ground zero, you have to come up out of that hole. So to get to 100%, you have to give 200% at this point. So you do yourself a disservice by just taking anything. And that goes for agents and editors. Like the biggest thing, and it's scary to do it, but the most power you have, as Justina said, is this is your product. You can take your ball and go home. Publishers can't sell books without books. You are the one who gives them the books. So it's okay to say no. If you don't like it, if it doesn't fit, if your gut tells you something's wrong here, say no. And I get it that that's a privilege in and of itself to be able to walk away from money on the table, right? Like I've been in that situation, not just in publishing, but in life where it's like, this sucks, but I gotta feed people. I gotta keep a roof over I got bills. So there is that aspect of it. But at the same time, you do want to kind of keep an eye on how much of that can I give up? Like what's the exchange here? What am I getting? Because you always want to be getting something, even if it is just the money. You want to think on the back end. Okay, so this has happened. Once I'm done with this, how can I recoup whatever negative it is that I took? Because again, you have the power. Is it doing a pen name? Is it going to a different age category? So there's lots of decisions that you need to take into account for something like that. But yeah, I forgot the question. I do that.
Can I also just note that I look at past sales. That's part of my job. Am I judging you for it? Not necessarily, but I have to do paperwork. I've said this on Twitter numerous times. I got to do paperwork, and the paperwork never freaking ends. from an editorial standpoint, right? And so part of that paperwork is I'm suggesting, I'm saying I want to acquire this book or books from this editor, this author, and this may be their past, but I have to know that, even if it's under a pen name. Like, I have to know it. And we crunch all these numbers and we bring it up, and that may or may not affect the advance number. If everyone's super enthusiastic about this current book, and I'm doing my job and selling it well in-house, then these things don't necessarily come into play. But there is a record. And keep in mind, it's not always a fair record, because for authors who got published last year, they shouldn't be penalized for anything. I feel like everyone should get a pass on what happened, unless you were on the bestseller list like Britt Bennett was for like 6 months. Like for a lot of people, it just was devastating on many levels, health, mental, and especially if you're coming out as a creator or a debut, especially, right? And so that shouldn't count, but there is a record. And so if you're doing certain things motivated by fear more than by logic or by gut, I question that, because then I'm going to not necessarily want to work with you either. I don't want to work with someone who's going to do whatever I say or not, or just be like, because that's an author who's going to come back and bite me in the ass, to be quite frankly. Like the authors who just sit back and are like, well, publishing is just going to take care of me. No. That's not how this goes. It's collaboration from start to finish. What do you want? I need to know what you want. Tell me what you don't know. I try to be as informational as possible. I don't know what you don't know. I'm going to make assumptions. I'm going to be like, it's, to me, start to finish. You need to be working on this book and for this book from the time you finish it to the time we're out, like making the paperback after we've done the hardcover. Like, it doesn't stop. So you need to understand that as an author, like your work doesn't stop. But is this a one book? Take the money and run. If all you have in you is one book, take the money and run. If you want a career, think about that. Think about that. And go with the people who are going to help you do that. Or maybe it's just, this is the best person for this book, but not for my second book, because I'm doing different things now. I've grown. And you can learn from the mistakes. I definitely continually learn from mistakes. So hopefully we're all doing that. But again, just to echo what's been expertly said from Elle and Justina, like from my end, it doesn't help your case.
So there are a couple questions on self-publishing I want to answer really quickly because we have to wrap up. We only have 2 minutes. But in terms of money, when I started self-publishing 6 years ago, I started looking at it 7 years ago. I spent like a year researching. I really recommend you do your research. And like I said, try to join communities. There's so many more like editors and cover designers and just businesses that have sprung up around self-publishing. So it is in some ways easier to self-publish. There's more courses and books about it. It still costs money. You still have to, I would highly recommend getting a professional editor and a professional cover designer, but also focus on your genre. Genre is much more important in self-publishing. Amazon genres, and looking at what is selling and why it's selling. And then that can tell you a lot. You have to know your audience. You have to know who you're selling to because you're writing, and you have to know how to market it almost when you're writing. I find that it's a different audience than my traditionally published books. Some people cross over, some don't. But the self-published, they want to spend 99 cents or $2.99 for a book. They'll read 15 books a week. Romance. Other genres might be a little bit different, but there's just it's a different beast. So yeah, I would recommend doing a lot of research. There's plenty of podcasts and books and courses, and feel free to email me if you have any specific self-publishing questions. But we have like a minute, so just let's wrap up, and any final advice and where you can be found in your next project that we should all check out. So let's start with Jen.
We can start with the full-time authors first. Yeah, just go to my website, jennifernbaker.com.
Okay. Elle?
My website, llmckinney.com. The social media, I think, is in the upper right-hand corner. At least it was the last time I checked it. And that's me across the board. You can find me pretty much anywhere on social media. Not lately, though, because I have a dead life.
Justina.
My next thing is I have another Star Wars book. If you like Star Wars books, it's a YA. It's called Out of the Shadows. The lead is a Black lesbian. So I'm pretty excited about that. Black lesbian human, because we have to identify the species in Star Wars. So that comes out end of July. For me, you can find me at my website, JustinaIreland.com, or you can find me on Twitter sometimes as at Justina Ireland, but like I'm not there right now because it's too stressful, man. Like, like I got shit to do. Like I can't argue with people all day. So so JustinaIreland.com, that's your best bet.
And I'm at lpenelope.com. I have a podcast called My Imaginary Friends, which you can listen to if you want to. And I want to thank everyone here for being on a great panel. I've had a lot of fun. Hopefully everyone had a good time.
And thanks for moderating.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome
Leslie,
moderating.
thanks, Elle. Thanks, Justina.
Yeah.
Stay safe.